With Russophobia rampant in the U.S. media, in Congress, and with the Mueller investigation, along with the demonization of President Putin, I felt it necessary to provide an alternative narrative based on my own personal research and contact with dozens of Russians on 2 recent visits to Russia. Let me state it clearly and unequivocally. Russia is not a utopia, and Putin is not in line to be canonized. Russia has many serious problems, and Putin has his faults and failures. It is my intent to counter the narrative that Russia is an enemy of the United States and a grave threat to our security and our democracy. My own eyes have been opened, and I hope to open the eyes of anyone serious about seeking the truth, not only about Russia, but about our own country's past and present behavior. Russians are a very proud and friendly people. You can see it in their faces, in their parades, and their magnificent churches and monuments that are everywhere. They are proud of their history, their culture, their values, and their many accomplishments. Russians are also a peaceful people who abhor war as only a people could who lost over 20 million in World War II, the Great Patriotic War as they call it, and another 17 million who died of disease and starvation. Russia is an immense and diverse country with large resources of oil, gas, gold, silver, water, forests, and wildlife. Cities like Moscow combine ultra-modern skyscrapers, shops, and malls with Soviet-era housing. But much of Russia is rural, poor, and unchanged. The escalating downturn of U.S. relations with Russia and the out-of-control Russophobia and Putin bashing in the American and Western media and coming out of Washington has made the whole world a more dangerous place than during the Cold War. For this reason, it is more important now than ever that we get to know who these Russians are and why the U.S. foreign policy establishment hates all things Russian, and especially President Putin. This is unfortunate because Russia has changed dramatically since the fall of the Soviet Union and communism. We can be sure much of the recent distrust and hatred comes from the Communist and Soviet Union era, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the fear of the spread of communism in Central and South America, Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and the Philippines. The domino theory was at the heart of U.S. foreign policy from Eisenhower to Kennedy, LBJ, and Nixon. 3 ignominious figures, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, Senator Joe McCarthy, and CIA Director William Casey, all created mass hysteria about the influence of communism and communists in American culture and politics. Zbigniew Brzezinski, a fierce anti-communist, influenced Lyndon Johnson and Jimmy Carter, and still wields considerable influence in neoliberal think tanks today. Arguably, Ronald Reagan, a fierce anti-communist, did more than anyone to create the fear, distrust, and hatred of Russia when he publicly painted Russia as the Red Menace, the evil empire, and the focus of evil in the modern world. He described Russian morality as non-existent.
I heard a young father, a very prominent young man in the entertainment world, addressing a tremendous gathering in California. It was during the time of the Cold War, and communism and our own way of life were very much on people's minds, and he was speaking to that subject. And suddenly, though, I heard him saying, "I love my little girls more than anything," and I said to myself, "Oh no, don't say that." But I had underestimated him. He went on, "I would rather see my little girls die now, still believing in God, than have them grow up under communism and one day die no longer believing in God." They are the focus of evil in the modern world. To ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil.
And it was Ronald Reagan who missed the one chance to eliminate nuclear weapons in the world, Mikhail Gorbachev pleaded with Reagan to end the arms race. Reagan's refusal to give up Star Wars, the strategic defense initiative to militarize space, ended the chance not only to rid the world of nuclear weapons, but for peace between the United States and Russia.
Gorbachev offered Reagan everything he had wanted. They would both destroy half their long-range bombers and missiles, eliminate all the missiles threatening Europe. And he made a major concession on human rights. Gorbachev insisted that all the missile reductions he proposed were contingent on restricting SDI research to the laboratory. Reagan refused. The meeting appeared to be over. At this point, the Soviets challenged the Americans to make a concession. The U.S. delegation did. It agreed to abide by the treaty banning space defenses for 10 years, and proposed that during that time, both sides scrap all, not just half, their long-range missiles. Reagan liked the boldness of the proposal.
You've got the two leaders of these two powerful countries running way beyond their arms controllers and their defense ministries and their state departments and saying, let's get rid of nuclear weapons.
Reagan could realize his dream of reducing the nuclear threat, perhaps only by risking his dream of a space defense. Gorbachev still insisted on restricting SDI research to the laboratory.
It took tremendous discipline for Ronald Reagan to leave that little room without an agreement.
I still think we can find a deal, Reagan said. Gorbachev replied, I don't know what else I could have done.
We were that close to getting rid of all missiles. And he said he wouldn't give in. He kept insisting that we had to do away with SDI. And I couldn't do that. He said, I promised the American people I would not give in on that. I cannot do it.
Russia began to change in the 1980s, and in 1989, President Mikhail Gorbachev instituted policies known as perestroika and glasnost, reforms and openness. He changed the Soviet constitution that eventually led to the fall of the Soviet Union. Because of an arms race with the US, Russia was impoverished, bankrupt, and a country in distress. In 1991, the Soviet Union had completely crumbled, and Gorbachev stepped down, giving his rival Boris Yeltsin complete power over Russia.
When you started the perestroika, could you imagine the scale of the changes to come?
I think I did, but not completely. It is dangerous to start a storm in our country. If you lose control, you may get into a lot of trouble. Khrushchev's reforms basically failed, and Kosygин's reforms failed. We realized from experience that it was dangerous to wait much longer, that we had to take a risk. But we couldn't postpone it. We needed changes.
When did you finally get a clear realization that there was no return to the past?
I don't agree when people say that perestroika failed. It didn't fail. It was disrupted, derailed, stopped. But still, perestroika achieved a lot. Inside Russia, we had democracy, free elections, freedom of conscience, private property, freedom to travel abroad, everything. Also, glasnost. There was so much openness, the entire country was affected. People realized they had finally got some freedom, an opportunity to act. In foreign affairs, we put an end to the Cold War. We normalized our relationship with the US. We reunited Germany. We didn't send our tanks or troops there. All our units in Eastern Europe stayed where they were.
Do you think we will ever come to a world without nuclear weapons?
We must do it, and I believe that sooner or later we will get there. But to get there, we have to put the world back in order first. Nuclear arsenals were significantly reduced thanks to our efforts during perestroika. Today, when the world is so divided, we need to find things that bring us together. For instance, the G20 is a step which brings us closer. It's an instrument, a mechanism for handling the hardest and most challenging issues. But we need more than that. It's a matter of learning to live in a global world.
The U.S. government, under President George Herbert Walker Bush, together with his CIA old boy network, plotted the breakup of the Soviet Union and the looting of its assets. Boris Yeltsin, in reality a CIA asset, would be their man in Moscow. The Bush network of CIA old boys used the KGB agents they recruited to engineer the coup d'etat in June 1991 that brought down President Gorbachev and placed Yeltsin in the presidency. Once they had their man in power, they had control of trillions of dollars worth of Russian gas, oil, nickel, gold, aluminum, and uranium. These KGB generals, Bush's kids as he called them, all in their 30s and 40s, became the oligarchs who took control of the state's assets. These CIA-run oligarchs betrayed their own country and people and literally stole billions and billions of dollars of assets. The Bush cabal also used NGOs, the National Endowment for Democracy, and George Soros's Open Society Foundation to make it all happen. It was George Soros, Larry Summers, Jeffrey Sachs, their Harvard University economist, and the IMF who orchestrated the shock therapy on the Russian economy that led to the privatization of Russia. In 1993, a political transition took place when Bill Clinton defeated George Herbert Walker Bush for the presidency. In 1996, the Clinton administration mounted a massive campaign to get Boris Yeltsin elected for a second term. Yeltsin was despised in Russia for the privatization of the Russian economy, which resulted in rampant corruption, violent crime, widespread poverty, food and fuel shortages, and the non-payment of wages and pensions. The economic situation under Yeltsin, brought about by the CIA-run crowd, became so severe by the end of 1999 that Yeltsin appointed a young, unknown KGB agent, Vladimir Putin, who had been the head of the FSB, the successor to the KGB. Putin was tasked with putting the Russian house in order without endangering the results of the wholesale national privatization in the 1990s. His secondary task was giving all sorts of personal guarantees to outgoing Yeltsin and his family. These KGB oligarchs thought they could buy Vladimir Putin like they did Yeltsin. Little did they know, but Putin led a faction of patriotic nationalists within the intelligence community who wanted to stabilize and preserve Russia as a functioning nation. And so Putin told Yeltsin, "If you resign and get out of politics, we will leave you alone." Yeltsin then resigned and named Putin as acting president until elections could be held in March of 2000. Vladimir Putin was elected and began the long and arduous battle of trying to stabilize Russia as a functioning economy. Immediately after 9/11, 2001, Vladimir Putin was the first to call George W. Bush to offer condolences and help in fighting terrorism. Unfortunately, the Bush administration used the attacks of 9/11 to curtail the civil rights of American citizens with the Patriot Act and the National Defense Authorization Act, and then began encircling Russia with the so-called missile defense system. And then in June of 2002, Bush pulled the U.S. out of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, signed in 1972, and sacrificed a partnership with Russia in the war on terror in order to guard against some external imagined threat with a missile defense system that was largely unproven in the field. It didn't help that in February 2007 at the Munich Security Conference, Vladimir Putin publicly castigated the United States for its repeated violations of international law.
Into international affairs, the concept of a unipolar world, and with which results unilateral and frequently illegitimate actions have not resolved any problems. Moreover, they have caused new human tragedies and created new centers of tension. Judge for yourselves. Wars as well as local and regional conflicts have not diminished, and no less people perish in these conflicts. Even more are dying than before, significantly more. Today we are witnessing an almost uncontained hyper-use of force, military force, in international relations. Force that is plunging the world into an abyss of permanent conflicts. We are seeing a greater and greater disdain for the basic principles of international law, and independent legal norms are, as a matter of fact, coming increasingly closer to one state's legal system. One state, and of course, first and foremost, the United States, has overstepped its national borders in every way. This is visible in the economic, political, cultural, and educational policies it imposes on other nations. No one feels safe, because no one can feel that international law is like a stone wall that will protect them. Of course, such a policy stimulates an arms race. I am convinced that the only mechanism that can make decisions about using military force as a last resort is the Charter of the United Nations. Along with this, it is necessary to make sure that international law have a universal character both in the conception and application of its norms. And what happens to the assurances our Western partners made after the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact? Where are those declarations today? No one even remembers them, but I will allow myself to remind this audience what was said. I would like to quote the speech of NATO General Secretary, Mr. Warner, in Brussels on the 17th of May 1990. He said at that time that the fact that we are ready not to place a NATO army outside of German territory gives the Soviet Union a firm security guarantee. Where are these guarantees? The stones and concrete blocks of the Berlin Wall have long been distributed as souvenirs. But we should not forget that the fall of the Berlin Wall was possible thanks to a historic change, one that was also made by our people, the people of Russia, a choice in favor of democracy, freedom, openness, and a sincere partnership with all the members of the big European family. Dear ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I would like to note the following. We very often, and personally I very often, hear appeals by our partners, including our European partners, to the effect that Russia should play an increasingly active role in world affairs. In connection with this, I would allow myself to make one small remark. Russia is a country with a history that spans more than 1,000 years and has practically always used the privilege to carry out an independent foreign policy. We are not going to change this tradition today. At the same time, we are well aware of how the world has changed. We have a realistic sense of our own opportunities and potential. And of course, we would like to interact with responsible and independent partners with whom we could work together in constructing a fair and democratic world order that would ensure security and prosperity, not only for a select few, but for all.
And then, at the UN in 2015, speaking after Barack Obama, who bragged about American exceptionalism and the use of unilateral military force, Putin reflected on the destruction of Iraq and Libya, and again scolded the United States, saying, "Do you realize now what you have done?"
I lead the strongest military that the world has ever known. And I will never hesitate to protect my country or our allies unilaterally and by force where necessary. But I stand before you today believing in my core that we, the nations of the world, cannot return to the old ways of conflict and coercion. Consider Russia's annexation of Crimea and further aggression in eastern Ukraine. America has few economic interests in Ukraine. We recognize the deep and complex history between Russia and Ukraine. But we cannot stand by when the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a nation is flagrantly violated. If that happens without consequence in Ukraine, it could happen to any nation gathered here today. That's the basis of the sanctions that the United States and our partners impose on Russia. It's not a desire to return to a Cold War. So the United States is and remains the one indispensable nation. That has been true for the century past, and it will be true for the century to come. That America's willingness to apply force around the world is the ultimate safeguard against chaos. And America's failure to act in the face of Syrian brutality or Russian provocations not only violates our conscience, but invites escalating aggression in the future.
Достаточно посмотреть на ситуацию на Ближнем Востоке и в Северной Африке, о чем говорил предыдущий выступающий. Конечно, политические, социальные проблемы в этом регионе назревали давно. И люди там, конечно, хотели перемен. Но что получилось на деле? Агрессивное внешнее вмешательство привело к тому, что вместо реформ государственные институты, да и сам уклад жизни были просто бесцеремонно разрушены. Вместо торжества демократии и прогресса – насилие, нищета, социальная катастрофа. А права человека, включая и право на жизнь, ни во что не ставятся. Так и хочется спросить тех, кто создал такую ситуацию. Вы хоть понимаете теперь, чего вы натворили? Но, боюсь, этот вопрос повиснет в воздухе, потому что от политики, в которой лежит самоуверенность, убежденность в своей исключительности и безнаказанность, так и не отказались.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham recently responded to Donald Trump's suggestion that Russia be admitted into the G7. There's no way I would ever agree to give Russia that legitimacy. The Soviet Union may have fallen, but what it represents is alive and well in Putin's Russia. All of these affronts, rebukes, and Putin's unwillingness to accept America's dream of a unipolar world has created the mass hysteria against all things Russian and the demonization of Putin. But perhaps the greatest fear is that Russia has regained its superpower status and because of the sanctions has established close economic, diplomatic, political, and military relations with China and the BRICS nations. This is an epic battle between political and economic systems, and it represents the greatest threat to American hegemony and her capitalist interests around the world. If we could peer through the fog of our own worldview, perhaps we could discover the truth about Russia and President Putin. And if we could personally get to know Russians and their beautiful country and culture, we would without a doubt make peace with them. For you see, they are just like us in so many ways.
I like my president. I think that it's good man and he make our country and Crimea and my motherland better. And he save our Crimean people.
What's your name?
My name's Kate.
Kate.
I'm also Kate.
You're also Kate.
And I'm Vitaly.
And you're Vitaly. Okay, so are you happy to be part of Russia now?
Yeah.
Surely.
Yeah, did President Putin send the army to annex Crimea?
It was our decision.
Whose decision?
Crimean people.
To enter Russian Federation.
So how did you do that? How did Crimean people do that?
I can say that all people, they felt that something in Ukraine, the situation in Ukraine, is not the best. So we just take the decision that we should change our life, and Russian Federation give her hand to Crimea, and she saved us from a big and the worst final, the war. So I can say that Vladimir Putin is pragmatic, but he's he's a very he open-hearted person. He saved us from a war.
What percentage of people voted?
97.
97% of all Crimea voted to return to Russia.
Yes.
Are you happy with that?
I want to say that not only I'm happy, but my parents are also happy, and people around me, most of them are happy to return to Russia. For example, I can say that my father works in our local hospital, And when we were in Ukraine, it was something like awful situation there. And when we returned to Russia, our hospital was repaired, and now my father has an opportunity to work with the most modern equipment, and he can make operations that he couldn't do when we were in Russia.
Is your father a doctor?
Yeah, my father is a doctor, and he is a surgeon.
A surgeon?
Yeah, and my father is really happy to be in Russia because now we have a great amount of opportunities for common people to be treated for no money. You can have good operation, not paying anything.
Free?
Free. It's
free operation?
Yeah.
My name is Kotlerova Tatiana. I'm from Russia, from Taganrog. Maybe someday there will be real peace between our countries.
Your country and our country want to live in peace. I think all people in all countries want to live in peace. I also invite you to visit our country.
Russia never was an evil empire, a red menace, nor the force for evil in the world. If Americans would look in the mirror, they would see that their own country is and has been the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. The United States has intervened more than 500 times militarily to protect her capitalist interests. The threats and intimidation continue today against China, North Korea, Syria, and Russia, with massive war games right on Russia's borders. But instead of spreading freedom and democracy, America has spread death and destruction in countless countries around the world, including Japan, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, and Pakistan. Since 1945, the United States has killed more than 20 million innocent civilians in 37 victim nations. With the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a new era in human history began. It is an era when all of humanity, in fact, all life on Earth, can become extinct. In addition, since 1945, the U.S. has meddled in the affairs, including the elections of other nations, more than 80 times. And let us also not forget how the NSA has spied on Angela Merkel, Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff, and billions of private citizens around the world. American covert operations have been disrupting democratic institutions not only in Russia, but everywhere else, including the violent overthrow of dozens of governments. No other country, including Russia, comes close to this blatant disregard for international law, the UN Charter, and the sovereignty of other nations. Nearly 30 years have passed since the fall of the Soviet Union, and still America and the West refuse to believe that communism is dead and that Russia now embraces a market economy and most of the political and social values of the West. Thanks to President Putin, Russia is again a global superpower and a threat to American hegemony and interests. When I asked people whether the U.S. imposed sanctions were hurting Russia, their answers varied. Some categorically said yes, others insisted that they were not hurting. However, the sanctions have forced Russia to increase its agricultural production and manufacturing in order to replace imports. In addition, Putin has responded to Western sanctions, the devaluation of the ruble, and the fluctuation of oil prices by expanding social programs and investing in the Russian infrastructure, all the while reducing once again Russia's military budget in 2018. Since the fall of the Soviet Union and with it state-imposed atheism, Russia has emerged as a very religious country. Many told me that even during the communist era, most people remain religious, if not openly. Though Russian Orthodoxy is the largest religion with magnificent churches and basilicas everywhere, many other religions are tolerated, including Catholicism, Protestantism, and even Islam. So when Americans demonize Putin, I have to remind them that the collapse of the Soviet Union was far worse than the Great Depression. In the 18 years since Putin has been in office, Russians have free health care, free dental and eye care. Most who did not sell or privatize their apartments and homes after the fall of the Soviet Union, when everyone had a place to live for free, still live debt and mortgage-free. Russia's larger cities have incredibly clean, fast, and efficient public transit, high-speed rail, and electric trains. The streets and boulevards are wide and filled with late-model cars. Moscow's metro is unrivaled anywhere else in the world. There are enormous modern shopping malls, shops and restaurants, museums and monuments everywhere. There is poverty and a disparity of wealth, but homelessness is rare. Russians are not burdened with debt. They get free education through university, 28 days of paid vacation and paid sick leave. Mothers receive paid maternity leave for the first year and a half after giving birth, plus $400. After a second child, she again receives paid maternity leave for a year and a half, the $400, and an additional award of $7,000. These financial awards have restrictions, but they can be used to help with housing, child care, and education. Taxes are nothing like they are here or in Europe. There are rewards and incentives for small businesses, and incomes have risen more than 7 times. Putin is even offering free land in Russia's remote and underdeveloped regions to Russians and even foreigners, the only stipulation being to improve it, farm it, or develop it. And the government has plans to raise the minimum wage to a living wage in order to help the working poor enter the middle class. Putin has also banned all GMO products and seeds. These are all steps that President Putin and the State Duma are taking towards building a democratic, legal, and social state in Russia. But there are those who admit that while people have the right to vote and elect representatives, these representatives are influenced by the majority party, the oligarchy, and the corporations, just like here in America. So when Putin is accused of being a dictator and a thug, his actions and accomplishments speak for themselves. I have met many people in Russia on my 2 trips there. I want you to meet some of them, up close and personal. Some skeptics will insist that there is no public opinion in Russia because they've all been brainwashed by the state or are fearful for their lives. Others will say these few are not representative of the Russian population. Listen and judge for yourselves.
My name is Veronika Borshova. I am an English teacher here in Sevastopol State University. Not into politics so much, but I think the American government is not very friendly towards Russia, first of all. And actually I'm not following a lot of things, but the relationships are definitely going very, very bad and getting worse every day.
Are you afraid maybe there will be war?
I try not to think about that because war is a very bad thing that could happen. There can be a war, of course, but I hope that people will still be human and nothing bad will happen to us. American people should know that Russians are good people who are not into war, who are for peace, and who I think we think about Americans as our friends. People, not politicians, not people in the government, but ordinary people. We don't think that Americans are our enemies.
You know, I've met some Americans and I've made some good friends with them. I think that people are the same everywhere, and when I was communicating with my American friends, I did realize that we are on the same wavelength. We are very close and we can understand each other, we can be friends. So I would like to say that Russians are really friendly and come to our country to see what it's like, that we are for peace and we want peace in the world.
Hello, my name is Tatiana Gurina. I live in Sevastopol, Crimea, Russian Federation. I would like to tell American people that Russian people are friendly and we have a lot of history that shows that Russia has never started war. We had to defend our country, to defend our land and our independence. So believe us, we are for peace, we are for cooperation. We would work together on a better world, on building a better world for our future, for our children, and to solve environmental problems, to solve problems of health, poverty in the world, rather than problems of expansion, war, and military issues. So let us work together on this.
Are you worried about climate change? People in Russia concerned about climate change?
Yes, personally, I am worried about it because we can see that there is a lot of pollution, there is a lot of climate change, and nature is rebelling against us humans, and one day it can be inevitable that we cannot do anything about it, and we will have to suffer, and our children will have to suffer. This is the main problem of all the humanity and all the world. This is what we should think about.
My name is Anton, my last name is Morozov. I'm a Russian man. I was born in Soviet Union and I am educated in some computer control and engineering. And I'm glad to meet with Regis, which is so interested in the affairs of connection between America and Russia. And I hope that the work and all which Regis is doing now will help both of our people to keep in peace and to keep our friendship forever.
What are your thoughts about President Putin?
Putin is different depending on interests of which people to represent. He is very good for rich businessmen and bad for working people. I, namely, do not support Putin totally, but I admit that his foreign politic is quite clever.
My name is Eugenia. I was born here in Yalta and I have lived here for most of my life. I work as an English teacher at a secondary school. I teach very young kids and I teach students at high school as well. I can't talk for all the people of the Crimea, but I love Mr. Putin. I mean, not love, but I do respect him. He is an exceptional person. He is very intelligent. He is an extremely hard-working person. If we look objectively, we can say that when he became the president of Russian Federation back in the year 2000, Russia was the country no one actually thought of seriously in the whole world, with only one superpower present at that time, and that being the United States of America. And no matter how we look at the situation, we can say that Mr. Putin has changed that. At least the world now seems close to being bipolar than it has ever been since the time of the Cold War. And this is due to Mr. President Putin. He has managed to awaken this feeling of national pride and patriotism in people.
What is your opinion of President Putin?
It's mixed and contradictory. He sends messages that I cannot understand. he's trying to go in two opposite directions at the same time. His external foreign policy contradicts his internal economic policy, and that's what puzzles me and many people who I know. Well, when he does right things, like returning Crimea where it belongs historically, everybody supports him. His rating skyrockets at this time. But when he joins the WTO or appoints certain people in the government that carry out wrong economic policy, then of course it undermines his rating. I have many friends in America. I like this country. I cherish good memories of my friends. And at the same time, people who carry out aggressive global policy. Therefore, I prefer to use different terms like transnational corporations or global financiers who stand behind the rulers. The rulers are just the performers, the puppets, if you like. So they do what they are told.
So you distinguish between American people and the American government and military complex.
I definitely very strictly distinct between American people and the military-industrial complex and the rulers and the global financiers and transnational corporations.
I'm Igor Leluk. I'm a retired Russian Air Force colonel. I'm native Ukrainian. I was born in western part of Ukraine, near town of city Lvov. I finished Kharkov Higher Military School. It's a eastern part of Ukraine. Previously it was, of course, Ukrainian Socialist Republic. Everywhere people are just the same. Despite their military or civilian people, they want only one thing, to be in peace, in wealthiness, and it's very interesting for me personally that American officers with whom I've been in United States in Air Command and Staff College were very friendly for me, and I never seen some kind of aggression. Therefore, it's very strange for me that now, when Russia became stronger, wealthier, that United States government became some tension between our countries. It's not a good idea, I think. Putin now is pretty good president for Russian Federation, and many people support him. Therefore, I think that if people support President Putin, maybe he's a really good president.
We love Russia. We are in Russia now. We love our new president. Putin is new president for us, you know, and we support his foreign policy. We think he doesn't want bad things for Russia. So that's why we're sure in our future, in future of our children. So, and we would like to have peace with everybody, you know, with America, and we remember good times, you know. I would like American people to find out the truth about the Crimea, about our history, even a little bit history. It will be very useful to understand why it was referendum, why it was Crimean Spring, and why we are so happy now to be in Russia.
18 months ago, you were very happy that Crimea was back with Russia, and you said life was much better than before. How is life now? Is it changed?
Our life has changed a lot, and a lot of good things have happened with us. You know, first, we see a very big attention to us from Russia, all areas of Russia, you know. Putin, he takes care a lot about the Crimea. and he is very sensitive about the Crimean people. You know, he wants to give us more and more and more. For example, a few days ago, a new bridge was built and it was opened for the car movement, and we are happy. You know, we became closer to Russia. So Putin has done a lot. He is a great man. We still love him, and he is not going, you know, to say words to be popular here. He has done a lot already, and he is very popular. We support and we trust him a lot.
My name is Alexander Rassokhin. I am a veteran of the Afghanistan war from Russia. Nowadays, I am an executive director of the Veterans for Peace in the Komi Republic, Russia. I have the great honor to make this video for you. We, Russian Veterans for Peace, as all citizens of Russia, worry about bad relationship between our countries. I'm sure that you are also disturbed by this situation no less than we are. Russian people want to live in peace, and we are against any war, neither cold or hot. I suppose you think so too. We are able to extend the hand of relationship to each other. We are able to give an example to humanity of showing regard for each other and aspiration for peace and friendship. God keep you. From Russia with love and peace. Thank you very much.
In June 2018, Russia hosted the World Cup. The stadiums, as promised, were ready. Modern, beautiful stadiums in 11 cities across the country, from St. Petersburg to Moscow, Kaliningrad, and Sochi. The 32 teams, absent the United States team, stayed in first-class hotels and practiced in state-of-the-art training facilities. The 2018 World Cup presented Russia with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to showcase itself in the most positive light to the rest of the world, blinded by the veil of stereotypes and evil propaganda. The World Cup did more to bring nations together and advance the cause for understanding and peace than anything else at this particular time in history. On July 16, 2018, President Trump went to Helsinki to meet President Putin. People everywhere, and here in America, should be relieved that Presidents Trump and Putin have publicly declared their intentions for continued dialogue in the pursuit of peace and better relations between our two countries. Apart from what many believe about Donald Trump and President Putin, both must be credited for this historic achievement. We can only redouble our efforts here, in Russia, and around the world to hold them accountable. For too long now, the world has been held in nuclear hostage by our two countries. Life on Earth is hanging in the balance.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Negotiations with the President of the United States, Donald Trump, took place in a frank and business-like atmosphere. I think we can call it a success and a very fruitful round of negotiations. We had a good conversation with President Trump, and I hope that we start to understand each other better, and I'm grateful to Donald for it. Clearly, there are some challenges left when we were not able to clear all the backlog, but I think that we made a first important step in this direction.
I have just concluded a meeting with President Putin on a wide range of critical issues for both of our countries. We had direct, open, deeply productive dialogue. Went very well. I'm here today to continue the proud tradition of bold American diplomacy. From the earliest days of our republic, American leaders have understood that diplomacy and engagement is preferable to conflict and hostility. A productive dialogue is not only good for the United States and good for Russia, but it is good for the world. The disagreements between our two countries are well known, and President Putin and I discussed them at length today. But if we're going to solve many of the problems facing our world, then we're going to have to find ways to cooperate in pursuit of shared interests. Too often in both recent past and long ago, we have seen the consequences when diplomacy is left on the table. But our relationship has never been worse. Nothing would be easier politically than to refuse to meet, to refuse to engage, but that would not accomplish anything. Constructive dialogue between the United States and Russia afford the opportunity to open new pathways toward peace and stability in our world. I would rather take a political risk in pursuit of peace than to risk peace in pursuit of politics. We also discussed one of the most critical challenges facing humanity, nuclear proliferation. We also agreed that representatives from our national security councils will meet to follow up on all of the issues we addressed today and to continue the progress we have started right here in Helsinki. Today's meeting is only the beginning of a longer process, but we have taken the first steps toward a brighter future. It's in the interest of both of our countries to continue our conversation, and we have agreed to do so.
If Russia is growing and making relationships with other nations, then Americans think we must be losing and that Russia is being aggressive. There are no winners in this zero-sum game. Russia never wanted this winner-take-all competition. It was forced on it by the U.S. On the contrary, Russia has been begging the U.S. to treat it with respect and as an equal partner ever since Putin became president in 2000. Russia and China have a different view for a new world order. They view a multipolar world based on mutual respect, the strict observance of international law and the UN Charter, the sovereignty of all nations, diplomacy versus confrontation, and cooperation rather than a win-at-all-cost competition. For decades, it has been hardwired into our collective psyche in such a way as to reject anything that does not conform to our view of ourselves, America, and the world. As Americans, we have been conditioned to believe that we are exceptional, God's favored nation, a beacon of truth, freedom, and democracy, a model for the rest of the world, and therefore the only nation able to lead. It is clear to me that President Putin and Russians of all ages do not want war and confrontation, but friendship and peace. I am convinced that ordinary Americans meeting ordinary Russians is the only path to peace in the world. It is up to us to hold elected officials accountable to us and not to those who would profit from war and confrontation and hold us all hostage. As citizens of this country, we have a responsibility for its actions. It is my hope that as Americans, we can accept the truth of our past and acknowledge the errors of our present course so that we can take our rightful place as one among equals with the rest of the world.